And next, we're going to talk about the glycemic index, which is a numerical scale that is measuring the effect that food has on our blood sugar. So let's get into that real quick.
So, for those that are unfamiliar, the glycemic index ranks food based on how quickly they raise your blood sugar levels compared to pure glucose, if you were to just take regular sugar. And it's scored as 100. So, a low GI or a low glycemic index means that it's going to have a slower, more steady increase in your blood sugar, right? So low GI foods are foods that move more slowly, have less of an immediate impact on your blood sugars. Medium GI is a moderate rise, and then if it's a high glycemic food, that means it's going to spike your blood sugar more quickly. So 55 and less is low. Anywhere from the mid 50s to the probably mid 70s is going to be moderate. And then anything 70 and above is going to be a high glycemic index food. So here are some examples. Low GI foods, non-starchy vegetables, broccoli, spinach, beans, lentils, chickpeas, pinto beans, black beans, what have you, and whole grains like quinoa, barley, oats. Think of the nutrient profile for these, and I have some questions there on the right side. Just consider each of those. So low glycemic index foods, those are kind of the quote unquote healthy foods that we think of. Medium GI foods, so sweet potatoes, bananas, basmati rice. These are some of the more carb heavy foods. Again, they still have other beneficial properties. Sweet potatoes have a bunch of minerals, a bunch of fiber. Bananas, same thing, a lot of fiber, a lot of minerals. Basmati rice, a little bit more starch and carb heavy, but not quite just pure sugar itself. So there are things to slow down the spike, but it's still going to be a little bit more rapid than that low GI section. And then down at the bottom, high glycemic index foods, white bread, sugary cereals, watermelon. I don't know why they throw watermelon under the bus like this, but there are some fruits, right? I think pineapple is one of them. It's really, really sugar forward, really, really heavy on the carbs up front with less fiber, less protein, less micronutrients to slow the absorption of that glucose. So high glycemic foods are a lot of the processed foods that you see, enriched wheat flour, sugar, artificial sweeteners, all of those can be high glycemic index foods. To the points to my right here, think about the nutrient profile of each level and what do you think is impacting the balances of the foods and their GI effects, right? Low glycemic index, not as high in the carb department, very high in the fiber and the nutrient department, right? So, and then medium GI foods, more sugar and a little bit, moderate nutrient and fiber. And then the high GI foods is all sugar, nothing to slow it down. Next to no fiber, next to no micronutrients, right? So you can kind of think of that as a balancing scale. The low GI is going to be high micronutrient, high fiber, lower carb. Moderate, and then the high GI foods, more carbs, less micronutrients. So again, I'm not telling you not to eat watermelon, not to eat pineapple. They all have their place, but that comes back to the what are you eating it with and how can you mitigate that immediate blood glucose spike, whether it be insulin or the foods that you can eat with it to help slow it down as it moves through your GI tract. So why does it matter? Obviously, the impact on your blood sugar. The low glycemic index foods are going to have less of an impact, not zero. Like they'll still raise your blood sugar if you're not paying attention, but it will be much slower than if you were a high glycemic index food because those high GI foods are going to cause a rapid increase. When you eat more low glycemic index foods, your blood sugar will be inherently better because the food is moving more slowly. The insulin has more time to take effect. And thus, the better your blood sugars are, the less long-term complications you're at risk of experiencing. And the less roller coaster rides, right? If you're eating high glycemic index foods, you see your blood sugar spike, you're like, oh my God, I got to give myself all the insulin. So you give yourself that whole lot of insulin. it brings that spike back down, but because you bolused to accommodate for that rapid spike, you gave too much, and then you go back down, and then you got to eat something to bring yourself back up, and then and it's just too much. Low glycemic index foods are the best way to avoid that. However, there are some limitations to that glycemic index scale, and it's not something to live or die by. Portion size matters, right? So some people say, oh, well, if it's a low glycemic index food, it's not going to bother my blood sugar at all. If you eat a whole lot of it, it's still going to have an adverse effect on your blood sugar. You still need to make sure that you're giving yourself adequate insulin to accommodate that slower spike. GI, lower glycemic index, or not lower, but the GI index does not account for combining foods, right? So like you could look at a plate and it's got one high glycemic index food on it. You could be like, oh, I can't eat this. It's got a high GI food. But when you think about all of the low GI options that are slowing that glucose absorption, like fiber, like fat, like protein, there are there's some nuance to that GI scale that that putting individual labels on food isn't acknowledging. And obviously processing and ripeness. So how you cook it and the ripeness of the food that you cook is going to impact the glycemic index. Starchy green bananas have a much lower glycemic index than ripe or overripe bananas. That just has to do with the fiber content and the glucose availability. Pre-ripe green bananas have a lot more fiber, a lot less sugar. Overripe bananas have a lot more sugar, a lot less fiber. That's going to skew the GI scale. So practical tips. Make sure that if you are going to eat a high glycemic index food, make sure that you've got a low GI index food around so that you can help mitigate that blood sugar spike. Eating whole foods is chef's kiss. That's what's going to be the savior here. Make sure that you're getting enough fiber, micronutrients, fat, protein to help mitigate those blood sugar risks. All right. For an example, rice bowls are very popular just in kind of like the fast food and takeout. Make your own, first of all, so that you know what the ingredients are. But if rice is going to give you a problem, swap a lower glycemic index option to help mitigate that spike. I use quinoa for just about anything I would rice these days. So keep that in mind.